Chapter 8 The Mayor is Dead. In 1998, Opie and I were at the height of our popularity in Boston. We were into our third year at WAAF and number one in the ratings book, consistently beating out our competition by a landslide for our target audience. The station intended for us to play music, and up until this point, we had never officially done a real talk show. The breaks got longer, and we started dropping a lot more songs. The hour, which originally started with 12 songs, went down to 6, and we talked the rest of the time. The more we talked, the higher our ratings went. The PD didn't know what to do. He came into the studio one day and said, "Are we a talk radio show now?" I replied, "Yeah, I think we are." Within a year, it metamorphosized into a full-time talk show, known as the Opie and Anthony Show. It was clear that our audience wasn't tuning in for the music. They were listening to hear what Opie and I were going to say or do next. April's Fool's Day was the perfect example of how we could separate ourselves from our competition. We'd usually goof on every other jock's attempt at a bad April Fool's prank. We marveled at how anyone could ever fall for these transparent hoaxes. It was always something so ridiculously stupid like, "There's going to be a meteor at noon today, so when the clock strikes 12 and you look up, you'll see a meteor." Come on, man, does anyone believe that shit? Another jock would say, "We're changing our format to all Elvis songs." They'd play 2 Elvis songs and say, "April Fools." It was so lame. If you want to do that, do it till midnight. People would be like, "I know it's April Fools, but fuck, are they really doing this?" On one particular April 1st, Opie decided he wanted to do something really outrageous and ridiculous that no one would ever believe. Early that morning, he called me up, giddy as a schoolgirl, and said, "I got it." I was literally half asleep, in that state when you're awake, but also so groggy you're practically dreaming your own consciousness. "You got what?" I muttered. "An April Fool's gag," he said. "We're going to say Mayor Tom Menino is dead." I was like, "Great, sounds cool, I'll see you later," and went right back to sleep. Later that day, I got into the studio, and Opie and I started game planning the situation. Even though I hadn't been doing radio very long, my radar went off that this could be real trouble. The thing is, we were always in trouble, and whatever we did that was deemed controversial translated into more popularity among our fans. It never occurred to me to say, we shouldn't do this, because trouble was great. If you're in the shock jock radio game, trouble is absolutely what you're looking for. The mayor was in Florida at the time, and Opie came up with a scenario that he'd been involved in a car accident that resulted in his death. April Fools! Opie knew a guy at WBAB with an amazing broadcaster voice and got him to call into our show as the news guy, giving us the story with all the facts behind the tragedy of the mayor's fabricated fatal vehicular homicide. It was set up very convincingly, but the goal was to have it snowball into something ludicrous and ridiculous. As the details came in, we intended to make them so unbelievable that everyone would know it was obviously an April Fool's prank. Opie got on the air and said, "We're getting some news about Mayor Menino in Florida. Just stay tuned. We'll come back in a few for more songs." Opie looked at me and I looked at him. We had just officially pushed the go button for this prank. The next break we came on and said, "We unfortunately have some tragic news that Mayor Menino has been killed in a car crash in Florida. We're getting details now, and we'll get those to you as soon as we come back from this next break." Once again, it is confirmed, Mayor Menino is dead. We were feeling weird about it because we knew some people would be losing their minds over this news. We knew where it was going and that our listeners would soon realize it was a prank. As soon as we made the initial announcement that the mayor of Boston was dead, our program director, Dave Douglas, came into our studio. We referred to him as Dave Dickless. Dave never had our back on anything that we did that could be perceived as controversial or outside the box of normality. The very things that were making us the toast of the town and increasing the numbers in our listening audience. After 3 years, Dave Dickless was figuratively castrated by us and our shenanigans. He would tell us, "Don't you dare do this. We're getting flooded with letters and complaint calls." The second he would leave, we would purposely do exactly what he had told us not to do. He'd come back in screaming during the commercial break, and we'd just pretend that there had been a miscommunication, saying, "Oh, we thought you meant that specifically." He'd scream, "You know goddamn well what the fuck I meant." His face would be bright red, and we thought his head was going to fucking explode. Dave came running into the studio right after we announced that the mayor had died in a car crash and said, "Okay, guys, what are you doing?" We explained that it was just an April Fool's bit. He said, "I'm not sure about this one. I don't like the way this could go." We tried to put him at ease. "Relax, Dave. The audience is going to realize soon enough that this is just a prank with our outrageous details." He was like, "Okay, just watch yourselves with this one." He left, and we came back on air with our broadcasting ringer from WBAB with the Ted Koppel voice, who sounded very newsworthy to confirm the car crash, and he had just nailed it. We then said someone else had been killed with the mayor in his car. Just getting this news, the passenger in the mayor's car who was also killed was a young Haitian boy. We wanted to lead up to the fact that he had been having sex in the car with this young Haitian boy while driving, and the car had spun out of control. Jesus. We never got to this point. The second we got done with our last report with our fake news correspondent, Dave Dickless burst into the studio and said, "We have to knock this off. We're starting to get calls from the news stations and concerned citizens asking if this is true. You gotta stop this now." We didn't want to just say, "April Fools." That's hacky bullshit and is exactly what we didn't want to do. So we refused to say it, but assured Dickless we'd stop speaking about it. We left it hanging there, in what was probably the most believable phase of it. If we would have been allowed to continue and make it seem stupid, people would have realized it was a fake news prank. Dickless made us stop right after we said the mayor was dead. Before the end of the show, we saw the news ticker on the bottom of the Fox 25 News say, "DJs claim Mayor Menino is killed." Opie saw this and went, "Uh-oh." We knew it wouldn't stop there. And this was really going to be something that would snowball into this huge thing before it finally went away. I was naive at the time. I was thinking, great, we did it. We made the news. Not a good thing. After the show, we were brought in for a meeting with our general manager, Bruce Mittman, and Dickless. They told us how they wanted this handled. They informed Rocco the DJ, the jock on our station who had a show after us, to announce it was an April Fool's joke, which he did. No one listened to Rocco, so who cared? No one heard it and was already out of the bag. The news had already started running with what we'd said, and it was now becoming a big local story. The next day we came into work and went on the air discussing it. Every news station wanted to interview us, and we were informed to not speak with any press. Bruce and Dave said they would prefer to handle it. We got done with the show that day and went out to the elevators, waiting for the doors to open. From out of the lunchroom came a camera guy and a local news anchor shouting, "What do you have to say to Mayor Menino and his family? They thought he was dead because of your he was dead because of your prank yesterday. Do you have any regret? Are you sorry?" Opie replied first, saying, "I didn't realize the mayor's family was fans of the O&A show." I just rolled my eyes in a sarcastic and patronizing way and said, "All right, we apologize to the mayor's family." I was so insincere, and we made an already tumultuous situation worse. Dickless and Bruce were right about one thing. They should have handled this for us. We were actually psyched about being on the news that night. This was great publicity for a shock jock show. The piece aired, and now the mayor's office was livid. Mayor Menino said his family heard it and really thought he was dead. I went on record saying I didn't believe it because you don't go to CNN for dick jokes and you don't listen to O&A for the real news. Things just escalated, and the mayor demanded we got fired. We were the scourge of society, and especially internally at the station with our Whip 'em Out Wednesday, the sex, and the other shit we pulled on the air that rubbed people the wrong way. When we killed the mayor, it really pissed off a lot of people. Mittman and Dickless came up with an idea to make us more likable. They wanted to publicly have us make amends for our sins. They said, "We'd like you guys to get in a stockade and we'll buy a bunch of pies and have the mayor throw pies at your face." Opie and I were like, "There's no fucking way we're going to do that. Are you out of your fucking mind? Do you think this is Nebraska local radio? No, we are not doing it. They insisted. Yes, you are doing this. Opie said, what does the mayor have to say about this? He had to sign off on it, and we knew he would never do it. We'd said he was dead. His family was traumatized. Would you think he would agree to let bygones be bygones with a pie in the face? They, of course, tried to facilitate this with the mayor, and he pretty much told them to go fuck themselves and wondered when these assholes were going to be fired. Here's the best part. While they were waiting for the mayor to answer them, they bought the pies. Not a couple, but a whole fucking load of pies. So once the mayor vehemently turned down their offer, they had to do something with all those pies. They came up with another brilliant idea to make us look likable. They wanted us to go to Boston Children's Hospital and give the pies to little cancer kids. Opie and I once again were thinking, you soulless motherfuckers. You want us to go down and use terminally ill children to get our shock jock jobs back? We said no, we're not going to do that. Well, we already set up that you guys were going to deliver the pies to the kids, Bruce and Dickless told us. We said, look, we'll be more than glad to go to the hospital and deliver the pies and spend time with the kids. That said, if we see any press, we're going to punch them right in the fucking face. This is not for public consumption. We delivered the pies and spent time with the kids, but there was no press about it. These two geniuses were out of ideas to save our jobs and increase our likability. Bruce actually made one last attempt, which was to stalk the mayor and jump out, then shake the mayor's hand while having a photographer get a picture. They did get the picture, and it was in the paper. It was captioned something like, GM of Shock Jock shaking hands with Mayor Menino saying fire them. It was a clusterfuck with them trying to salvage our jobs. Everyone made bonuses with our high ratings and sales went up. They could charge more money for a spot on our show. They didn't want to lose our show, which was making them the most money. This was a weird time for WAAF because it was owned by Zappis Communications. At this time, Zappis was selling WAAF to CBS Radio. CBS owned BCN, which was our main competitor, and we were beating the shit out of them. CBS said to fire us, which would allow BCN to be number one again in the afternoons. CBS was the one that really pulled the trigger on our getting canned. They made us go to Colonnade Hotel for an interview with an internal investigation. A woman was conducting the investigation and told us that this was merely a procedural thing, and she wanted to get us back on the air right away, which turned out to be bullshit. These types of inquisitions have only one goal, which is to find out who should be fired. We didn't have a prayer. We were done in Boston, and we knew it. Dave Douglas was suspended for 2 weeks, and Bruce Mittman was suspended for a month. A guy representative from CBS Radio came in and was the one who actually terminated our contract. He let us know we were being let go effective immediately, and was affectionately named the Terminator. You could tell the guy loved his job and really enjoyed firing us. Opie and I were obviously freaked out by this. Opie kind of knew this part of the business, and I was on the side. I was the one who was like, well, it was great while it lasted. Now what am I going to fucking do? Strangely enough, we'd had an interview a month prior with WNEW FM in New York. They really liked us and wanted to give us the gig. We unfortunately were under contract and not even supposed to be entertaining such meetings. This new program director, who'd just come on board with the situation, was familiar with O&A and loved us. He wanted to change the direction of WNEW and start with personality-driven radio like our show. Shortly after being terminated from our Boston gig, we hooked up with our agent, Robert Eatman. He got in contact with Opie and said he could really help us get the best deal possible with our next gig. Our last year in Boston, I was making $85,000. Chapter 9. Back with a Vengeance. Many people speculated that we were smart enough to purposely get fired to go to WNEW. We weren't. Was it a subconscious thing? Maybe. We were even being courted by an Atlanta station, 96 Rock, that wanted us to do the morning show. They took us to a strip club and showed us some amazing homes in Buckhead. They told us that there were so many New Yorkers there, it was almost a second New York. This actually played well into our agent Rob's hand, because two stations were bidding against each other. Our hearts were leading us to the mecca of broadcasting, Manhattan. Before CBS could sign off on their offer, we needed to get green light from the king of radio broadcasting and the president and CEO of CBS, Mel Karmazin. Opie and I had to fly from Boston to D.C. Then we took a car ride into the suburbs of Northern Virginia to a small office park where we sat in a waiting room till this southern guy could meet with us. He was going to determine whether we were okay to work for CBS Radio after being fired for our stunt in Boston. We were sitting there for a while until we finally got invited into his office. He said to us, "So you boys all good?" We were like, yeah. He said, "No tails or horns out of there?" "Nope, we're cool." He said, "All right, I'll sign off." We were in the office for literally 30 seconds and then back in the car to the airport and in the plane heading back to Boston. Opie and I looked at each other and said, "What the fuck just happened?" WNEW offered us a deal for $145,000 a year each. I really thought I had made it. I was earning what successful doctors and lawyers make a year. And I was also going to live in New York, my hometown, where I could be around my friends and family, which was a huge plus. The Terminator who had fired us in Boston was actually the same guy who ended up hiring us for WNEW in New York. Yep, CBS owned WNEW and fired us in Boston so their other channel could flourish and hired us for New York, where we could do well in their New York property. It was a win-win for everybody. I honestly think they had nothing to do with Zappos or WAAF. We wouldn't have been fired no matter how much the mayor yelled about it. Retrospectively, I think it was purely a political move on CBS's part to get us the fuck out of there. We were bitch-slapping BCN, and they wanted us in New York where we could hold down afternoons after Howard Stern controlled the mornings on their other station. After being fired in April, we were rehired in July and started our show on WNEW in September. This time, I hired a moving van, truth be told. I didn't even take much back to New York. Now that I had money, my wife and I decided to splurge a little and buy some long overdue new shit. You would think Jennifer would be as excited for me as I was. Nope. My wife was a little broken up about moving away from her mom again. Opie and Sandy Delgado, whom Opie was dating at the time, were actually sad to leave Boston as well. They really loved it there. I was thrilled about coming back home to New York. Jennifer and I rented a house in Huntington, Long Island. It wasn't even a quarter-mile away from the house Opie rented. We lived very close to each other, and at that time were very close friends. When we'd go through those times of just insanity, a lot of publicity, big money deals, the firing and hiring, we really did circle the wagons around ourselves. There was a close pack made up of myself, Jennifer, Opie, and Sandy. This was truly the most exciting time for me in my career. It was still new to me, and I wasn't jaded. I enjoyed every second of it, even the shitty parts when we got bitched out by our higher-ups or had personality conflicts with some of the staff. Nothing bothered me career-wise. It was my personal life with my toxic wife that was in turmoil. I'll get to that a little later. I was thrilled to be working in New York. Boston was cool. I would tell my family and friends I was well known there, but when I'd come back to New York to visit, nobody gave a shit. I remember a buddy of mine saying, I was out on Orion Point, Long Island, and I heard this crackly sound and it was you from WAAF. The idea of my coming back to this huge station that was the pinnacle in New York, where everyone from Long Island could and would listen to me, was beyond surreal. Opie and I were pretty cocky, with inflated egos and sense of self-worth. We were like, they can't get rid of us. The more controversial we are, the better we do. They fire us and in no time we have an even better job for much more money in New York. This is fucking awesome. Opie and I decided that whenever a boss would tell us what to do, we'd say, go fuck yourself. This methodology had worked perfectly for us up till this point. The guy who'd originally interviewed us for the job was our new program director, and he was out of his mind nuts. He had ideas for the station that would change by the minute. He wanted these old traditional music jocks who had been there since the 70s to somehow work with the likes of Opie and myself. These guys were the ones who had written books on rock and roll and were able to get quotes from Keith Moon because they hung out with him. They were traditionalists, and we were the pieces of shit who were fucking up the whole medium. When we first got to WNEW, these guys were the upperclassmen who had ruled the roost, and we were these new guys whom they didn't understand. They disliked us immediately. Our show very much catered to the male audience. We spoke about current events, sex, music, and we'd have listeners who would call us up or come into the studio and do outrageous shit. We'd have a girl who would call in and say, "Hey, I'd like to come in and stick a zucchini up my ass." "All right, come on up." They'd come in and we'd try to describe it the best we could. It was always a freak show / circus atmosphere. New York City was obviously the perfect canvas for the debauchery we needed to amuse our listeners. The timing was advantageous. During that pre-internet era, you could still do outrageous things on the radio and it would be considered crazy. Today I could pick up my phone and in 2 seconds see a chick blowing a moose. Back then you could describe a woman getting naked in the studio and it was considered really wild. Not to say we didn't do our fair share of crazy shit. We had a girl come in and stick a cell phone up her pussy to see if we can get it to ring. It did. We could hear the phone ringing and it was hilarious. It was that day that I switched to Verizon. Jesus, they really do get the best reception. Another thing that worked out timing-wise was that back in the old days, every station had a general manager and a program director right down the hall from the studio. If there was trouble, he'd be there to run in and put out any fires. When CBS started taking over a bunch of radio stations in various markets, they had sectors. They had a Northeast sector, where when we joined, they had one GM who would cover WNEW, a station in Philly, and another in DC, and he wasn't around all the time, breathing down our necks. This gave us the opportunity to be out of our fucking minds, since we weren't being supervised. The show became an enormous success really fast. We were climbing the charts and used it to our advantage by twisting the screws on management. Our PD had the biggest office in our studio, and during one of our negotiations, Opie demanded that it belong to us. The PD had to move into our smaller office. When we decked out that workplace with a refrigerator, a full bar, and a computer system I could play games on, I would hang out with our producer Rick and interns, Garrett and Ben, sometimes until midnight, partying and playing video games. Ron Bennington and Fez Watley were brought on to go on after our show from 7 to 11 p.m. I love those guys. They were funny and great to hang out with. Our audience was passionate and loyal, but their audience had this weird, almost cult-like quality. I used to hang out after my show with those guys because I didn't want to go home to my wife. We would drink and get hammered. They were the ones who could bring the girls up to the studio. Once again, no supervision. This workplace was like a frat house with constant drinking, smoking, drugs, and sex. I used to get laid on my desk in my office. It was a constant party that in hindsight had no end. There was just too much shit going on. I couldn't imagine another workplace today allowing the flexibility and climate we had then. You hear about these cool places to work today like Google. Yeah, it's great here. My boss skateboards down the hallway and it's wild. I was simultaneously mixing drinks, smoking cigarettes, and getting laid while spitting on skateboarders from my office window. Beat that, Google. We'd bring pinball machines and foosball tables into our lobby area and be smoking and drinking all throughout the show. We even had a Snapple machine that we filled with beer. I would pop open a Samuel Adams or Bud and put it behind my monitor. When it was gone, I'd get an intern to get me another. During breaks, I'd play foosball or pinball. It was like I was at a fucking bar drinking. This was my job, and I was getting paid very well to party my ass off. The PD didn't give a shit, and the GM was never there. As long as our ratings were kicking ass, they didn't give a shit what we did. Wonderful times. We thought we were untouchable. If you had ratings, that was it. You were fine. Nothing you said or did on air could get you in trouble with the higher-ups. This train of thought would eventually lead to our demise. In the second year, we really had a lot going on. We started doing personal appearances, live remotes from bars, and were even features in magazines like Maxim and Penthouse. Penthouse did a big article and photo shoot with us, which was literally a dream come true. I'd been jerking off to that magazine my whole life. Now I was finally going to be in it, and hopefully not having anyone jerk off to me. The photo shoot included a naked model with Opie and me dressed up like a geeky and Opie and me dressed up like geeky school kids. I remember telling my mom that I was going to be featured in a big magazine. I knew she was thinking, Time? Newsweek? National Lampoon? No, Mom, it's Penthouse. Hey, at least it wasn't Hustler with some scratch and sniff feature, my mom said. Are you going to be naked? No, Mom, I'm fully clothed with the naked girl. Thank God, Anthony, I'm so proud of you. During this time, WNEW turned into FM Talk 1027, and we started getting some interesting guests, but could never get the A-listers because Howard would get them. If Howard got the guest in the morning, then the powers that be didn't want the two shows to share. With Howard getting these A-listers, we were then relegated to what they thought would be the trash heap of guests, which turned out to be a lot of New York stand-up comics. The first few guys we had on our show were Rich Voss, Jim Norton, Patrice O'Neill, Nick DiPaolo, Otto and George, and Colin Quinn. It worked out really well for the comics and for us. It was like the comedian's table at the Comedy Cellar, but with microphones. The comics became regulars on our show and started feeling comfortable enough to be themselves without having to do their acts. Aside from comics, we had some unique characters come on the show. Case in point, Steve the Whistler Herbst. Now, if you tell a radio audience we have a guest who whistles, they're going to turn off the radio. Opie and I had to know how to make these guests interesting. If you can make a guy like this so entertaining that 15 years later, people come up to you and still talk about it, you did something right. This guy, Steve the Whistler, had won a whistling tournament, and we saw he was booked on the show. Opie and I never really planned what we were going to do with our guests. 90% of the time, it was all off-the-cuff riffing. We sometimes would have a segment called Bad Guest Day or Has Been Corner, and would never let the guests know they were part of that type of show. So Steve the Whistler came in and had a music disc that he was going to whistle along with. Opie put the disc in and Steve was going to whistle live to the musical track. I was sitting there just cringing at this whole fucking thing. The music began, Steve started whistling, and Opie immediately hit the button to stop the disc. Opie said, "Aw, man, if we can't get good equipment, how are we supposed to have guests come in? Damn it, Steve, we're so sorry. Let's just start again." Now, this was an example of how Opie and I worked very well together, because I knew exactly what he was doing. I was on this. I was playing good cop to Opie's clandestine bad cop. I knew damn well we were never going to hear that song, which was good. The audience didn't want to hear it, and neither did we. No one wants to hear a fucking guy whistle a song. Opie started it up again, and right when Steve chimed in to start this beautiful whistling, the music abruptly stopped again. Then I jumped in with, "What the hell is going on here?" We had Steve start this song 10 fucking times. He honestly believed there was technical difficulties. The audience obviously knew we were messing with this guy, and Steve couldn't be more obnoxious and was getting frustrated. He just wanted to jam out in the worst way and show off his prodigious whistling skills. I really didn't think it would last any longer. I seriously thought he was going to flip and punch us or something. He was so into the thought that he was on the WNEW radio and wanted to get his song out in the worst way. Steve would put up with anything, and he did. It got to the point where I couldn't take it any longer. I was literally crying from laughter. I said, "Let me check the wires," because I needed to go behind the equipment and take a second to compose myself. Opie kept a straight face without breaking character. The audience absolutely loved it. This is a great example of the Opie and Anthony show that all our fans know and remember us for. It wasn't like, "How'd you like the show today?" "Well, we had Arnold Schwarzenegger on." Then immediately people would think, "Wow, that must have been a great show." It was more like, "How was the show today? We had this guy Steve the Whistler on." No one's going to think that's a great show, but meanwhile, 15 years later, people still come up to me and say that fucking guy Steve the Whistler made me laugh my balls off. We had the ability to take stuff that normally another radio show wouldn't touch and make it work well. It was all we had to work with at the time. We were a very disrespected show for how well we were doing. This was directly due to Howard Stern's being part of the same company and management's no kowtowing to everything he said. Howard was their big money maker, and we had to put up with the leftovers. We got very good at working with utter shit to make it funny and entertaining. Our audience was passionate, and we were smart enough to utilize the internet in its early stages to be in touch with the listeners. We constantly had chat rooms up and running, and would upload pictures where we could share while doing our show, which connected us with our fans. We let everyone see what we and our studio looked like. It was like the live streaming of today in its premature state. We called it Stinky Cam after Garrett, whose nickname was Stinky. Garrett still works for me today. He found a program that was something like 10 frames per minute. Our audience was able to get glimpses of sometimes naked chicks and us doing our thing. The company didn't care what content was going out because they didn't even know what the internet was at this point. This really helped us integrate ourselves with our listeners in a unique way, and they flocked to it. They felt a part of the show. The fans were crazy, and Opie and I were constantly just trying to feed them what they wanted. It was like if you didn't feed them, they'd feed on you, and we didn't want any part of that. We developed an assault on the media. Once again, we barely had any resources from our company, which was CBS Radio. How about a commercial or a billboard for our show, we'd ask. They'd reply, it's not in the budget. So we had to make our own publicity. We had to think outside the box, which led us to the idea of having our fans hold up Opie and Anthony signs behind newscasters doing live segments on the street. That way our show was out there every night, and it was free advertising. We fucked up the news media so bad that they started doing their news spots on top of their vans. They were petrified. It started out with us suggesting to fans that they hold up a sign the second they saw a broadcast go live. Once you see the light go on the camera, just run up with a sign and yell, O&A, O&A. We'd reward these brave hearts by telling them to come back to the studio after they did it and hang out with us. We'd give them the shirts and hats. We'd give them shirts and hats. What started out with just flashing a sign behind a reporter was taken to the umpteenth level by fans now running in front of the reporter with a sign that had a big cock drawn on it. We fed the audience, and in return, they wanted to feed us. They wanted us to recognize their displays of loyalty by mentioning on air, "Oh wow, did you see that guy hold up the O&A sign? That was cool." Well, if that was cool, what are they going to say about me holding a sign with a huge cock on it? We loved it. We thought it was hilarious. There was a person who made a sign with the word cunt that was displayed clear as day on live TV. Sometimes the fan would call us right before doing it. We'd have the news on knowing it was going live soon, and we would have a guy around the corner directing him when to do it. Okay, go now. One time in front of the Ed Sullivan Theater where Letterman was taping, the reporter Marvin Scott was outside doing a piece, and we had one of our guys, Psycho Mark, run right at him yelling, O&A! Psycho Mark stepped on an ice patch and couldn't stop himself. He went sliding super fast and took out Marvin Scott during the live news segment. The anchor in the studio came on and was like, well, that was unexpected. We'll be right back after this commercial. We did get in a little trouble because some CBS stations got hit with these antics, and we were under the same company umbrella. We had to go on the radio and say, could you please not do the signs on CBS because our bosses are getting a little mad. That culminated in somebody taking one of those obnoxiously loud air horns and blaring it directly into a newscaster's ear. A year later, this newscaster and his wife, who was also a newscaster, filed a lawsuit against us. The lawsuit was hilarious. They claimed he suffered a loss of hearing, and his wife sued for lack of sexual relations as a result of this incident. They were suing for millions of dollars. CBS lawyers took over, and I believe they settled for just enough to cover their lawyers' fees and possibly a new TV that came with closed captioning. The press we got from all of this was well worth everything on our end. Our studio was on 57th Street and 7th Avenue, and as luck would have it, there was a Hooters restaurant conveniently located next door, which is where we did a signing of our Penthouse magazine article. These personal appearances would always turn into debaucherous parties with girls getting naked. We would constantly get into trouble with the owner of whichever place was hosting. These owners were fans of the show, and it went from, we love you guys, to, you can't do that, I'm going to get shut down. One time at Hooters, we had 2 girls take off everything, with just their panties remaining. Guys put a couch on stage, and these 2 chicks started making out with each other in their underwear in front of everyone. Opie and I just looked at each other and said, what the fuck is this? How did we get people to do this? There was a crowd screaming like it was ancient Rome. They were just loving it. And once again, another thing that led to our demise was that we thought it was never good enough. A girl would flash her tits and it was great. Then another girl would come up and they would both get naked and start making out with each other. Okay, even better. But no, let's take it even further. Get the couch up here so they can lie down. All right, throw some water on them. We would always try to bring it up another notch, never thinking anything bad would come of it. The louder the crowd yelled, the more energized we got trying to figure out the next thing we could do to make them yell louder. We did a personal appearance in Buffalo called T&A with O&A. It was a bar that was located right on the beach of Lake Erie. Our idea was to get local strippers and have them play volleyball on the beach. Perfect, right? Sounds like a fun day out with our fans. When we got there, the place was packed wall to wall with people in the bar and on the beach. A lot of drinking was going on, and the strippers started playing volleyball. These girls weren't very good. If they can get a volley back and forth 3 times, it was amazing. Needless to say, no one was watching them for their expertise at the games, as much as hoping a tit would pop out of a bikini. Meanwhile, this was a public area. The local authorities didn't close it off for our event, so there were families with their children on this beach, and the inevitable was pending. They weren't right next to the volleyball court, but they could easily see it. Once again, between the boisterous drinking crowd and the strippers with Opie and me at the helm, orchestrating ways to take things to another level, these poor civilians with their families never had a chance. We floated the idea of the strippers taking off their tops, and they couldn't get them off fast enough. Then some guy by the bar area found a bunch of fruits and vegetables. This guy started handing zucchinis and cucumbers to the strippers. The girls ended up on the sand totally naked, shoving vegetables in one another's vaginas and asses. Now, we weren't on the air, but we did have microphones and were doing a play-by-play for everyone, which included the innocent family bystanders who had become involuntary witnesses. I was like Howard Cosell. Oh, B, I can't see that cucumber fitting. Oh my God, it's going in all the way. Parents were grabbing their kids and running off the beach like there was a shark attack. It was quite the scene, but a hell of a lot of fun. We got back to Manhattan and heard from our GM that we were in big trouble and that people from Buffalo wanted to arrest us for inciting a riot that included public nudity. The only thing is, we weren't in Buffalo anymore. There was nothing the Buffalo authorities could do. Regardless, it was strongly suggested to us that we not go to Buffalo for a while. Say it ain't so. Anything but that. I wanted to summer there. The station had to answer a complaint from the FCC about the appearance. What? This was ridiculous. The appearance in Buffalo didn't even air on public radio. How the fuck could the FCC do anything about something that wasn't on the air? The company and their lawyers said we're going to go through everything we have to on this. In my recollection and knowledge of the FCC, it was the only time they ever got a complaint about something that wasn't on the radio. We were fired shortly after for a completely different incident, which made this Buffalo one a moot point. At this time, Opie and I would carpool in from Huntington, Long Island. We'd grab something to eat, discuss the news of the day, and hang out before our show. One particular day, I was served divorce papers from Jennifer at the radio station studio. I had just been starting to put away money and had $40,000 in the bank. My first instinct was to go to the bank and take $20,000 out. I just wanted my half. Opie came with me to the bank, and I filled out a withdrawal form. The teller at the bank came back informing me there was no money in this account. Opie just turned his head and gave me some privacy. The thing that pisses me off is that I was taking out $20,000 and going to do the right thing by leaving her half. This lady, who at one time said she'd be with me till death do us part, had decided to take more than her part. She had taken the whole nest egg, all $40,000 of it. This was all the money I had at the time. Her lawyer had advised her to take all the money out before serving me the divorce papers. Figures. The only smart thing she ever did in our relationship was hire the best divorce attorney. We walked out of the bank, and Opie just erupted, laughing his ass off, and said, "Dude, you got so fucked." I just joined in laughing. I realized it was officially over with Jennifer and worth whatever it would cost, which turned out to be a lot more than 40 fucking grand.